carried. 5 members present, a quorum.
Representative Green moves to approve the minutes of the May 7th meeting. Hearing no objection, they are approved. Today we are hearing presentations on SOAR funds for the Gotion EV battery plant for a second week here. And we will start out with a testimony from Randy Phelan, CEO of The Right Place. If you'll come take the seat when you get a chance. Look forward to hearing your testimony.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm pleased to share this quick testimony. If you don't mind, I'll take just a few minutes. I had a chance to talk with Representative Cara before this hearing and he asked me to keep the opening remarks brief. I'll do a quick introduction of myself, brief overview of The Right Place to provide some context, and then walk through the timeline of the Gotion project, if you will. Just by way of my background, is 30 years of economic development experience across the state of Michigan as well as across the country. I started as an intern in Gratiot County, worked in Osceola County just north of Mecosta, made my way down to Monroe County in the late 90s when the SUV industry was booming and the auto supply industry was in high interest then. Made my way across to the MEDC for a few years in site development work before really putting down roots in West Michigan to lead the Lakeshore Advantage effort, which is a newly formed organization serving the Holland-Zeeland area. Terrific time in my career where I understood the power of the collaborative nature of West Michigan. After 10 years, I ventured further west, leading an effort in Omaha, Nebraska, serving 6 counties across 2 states and understanding the dynamics of a larger regional effort. 3 of the 5 years, we were recognized as the best performing metro of our size in the country, which was an exciting time. Nothing as exciting as the time that I was in Denver, following the Omaha experience, moved to Denver, which is one of the more robust economies in the country, and got to witness firsthand what happens when you have a positive flywheel of growth take place within a market. In the summer of 2020, very close, the long-standing CEO of The Right Place retired. I put my name in the hat for that position and was pleased to take on the new role in March of 21 as the president and CEO of The Right Place. So very excited to be in this role. I work with a tremendous team, tremendous board of directors. And if you're not familiar, The Right Place is now celebrating our 40th year of service to West Michigan. It goes back to the early 1980s when, frankly, the economy of Greater Grand Rapids wasn't anywhere near what it is today. The economy at that time was challenged. We were coming off the oil embargo. Manufacturing was in dire straits. And the regional business leaders came together and asked the core question, how do we grow a stronger economy? How do we make it the right place for business? How do we make it the right place for people to achieve their economic potential? That sentiment sort of carried the day and was the founding sort of sentiment of the Right Place formation. The initial strategy behind the Right Place, I think, is telling even to this day. They hired the Battelle Institution to do an analysis of the regional economy and give an insight as to how we might build a stronger, more effective, more robust economy. That study boiled down to one core premise, that the world was getting smaller, the global economy was starting to be more interconnected, and they encouraged Greater Grand Rapids to connect existing manufacturers that were really bubbling up. We had a great core of entrepreneurs and help them find ways to be global and export their products around the world. Second, it helped inspire the community to pursue foreign direct investment, inviting international companies to invest in West Michigan. Over the last 40 years, we've gone about that work aggressively, helping our companies understand export opportunities and become far more global than most economies across the country, far outpacing the national average for exports, far outpacing many of our peers, and even aspirational markets in that regard. And on the foreign direct investment side, we set across the world, predominantly in Europe, but in Asia as well, looking for opportunities for companies to invest in our community. And today we have more than 150 international companies that call Grand Rapids home. Over the years that passed, over the last 40 years, in addition to that advanced manufacturing global mindset, we've added health sciences to the mix, which you've been through Grand Rapids, you can see it manifested most clearly in the medical mile, but it's really medical miles throughout our region as we've connected the health sciences opportunities to our manufacturing base, and we have nearly 50 medical device companies today. The most recent sort of addition to our strategy is tech. And so one block on 2, we've built out a strategy that's built on advanced manufacturing, health sciences, and now the tech economy. And it's caused our region to be the clear growth engine for the state of Michigan in the last 25 to 30 years. And we're now one of the top performing markets in the Midwest, up against the Columbus, Indianapolis, Minneapolis type of markets. And we're really proud of that work, really proud of the impact that we've been able to make across our region. Today, in talking with Representative Carr, the question really comes down to Gotion and the timetable and the incentives appropriated for that project. I want to walk you through the timetable to provide some context, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. It starts in June of 2021, frankly, pretty innocently enough relative to most economic development projects. At that time, Gotion, Chinese-based battery operation with facilities in Independence, Ohio and Fremont, California, was looking to make their first investment in the U.S. from a production standpoint. They had research and development facilities but never had produced in this country. They were scouring the country, the eastern portion of the country to be specific, looking for a facility, looking for a building to accommodate their growth, and couldn't find it. At that time, in the summer of 21, the company expanded their search to include industrial parks that were served with infrastructure. The principal site location lead for the company, a gentleman named Chuck Phelan, their VP at Gotion, with the sort of the impetus to find an industrial park rather than just a building. He lived in Mecosta County at the time. He went to Ferris State University, understand that community well. He wanted to do something positive for his community, and he called a phone number on the sign at the industrial park, the Big Rapids Township Industrial Park, asking if it would be available. Big Rapids Township had built an industrial park about 20 years earlier using Economic Development and Administration funds, US EDA funds to do so. They have one relatively small tenant in that space and 120 acres available. The company was inquiring whether it would be available for this project. That phone number went to the supervisor of the township, who took that call. A community that had planned industrial park for years has a call from a company that's interested in their space. He was excited and interested and wanted to pursue it further. A supervisor then called the MEDC, which is a natural sort of partnership outreach at that stage. MEDC, of course, interested in a large-scale investment with large opportunities in a corner, a region, sub-region of our state that doesn't see these opportunities often. Over the next day or two, the right place receives a call. Their township supervisor called us up and asked if we would assist them in this project. At that time, the Mecosta County Development Corporation, which had been established for decades, was without an executive director. That person had retired months earlier and they hadn't filled that position. The township supervisor was asking for the right place to support their efforts to secure this project. After some discussion and some conversation with them about the scope of the project, the scope of the need, we agreed to do so free of charge. It's in the halo of our region at that time. We saw an opportunity to assist and we were willing to do so. As I said, the company was first looking for a building and had not found it, opened up their search for infrastructure served industrial park, and that allowed us to go through a process of looking at the real estate, looking at the infrastructure, looking at the talent pool, and helping make the case as to why the Big Rapids area would make sense for this kind of project. And it does. In a lot of ways, there's a lot of great assets to that community that would be appealing to this company or any company, frankly. With Ferris State, with a hospital, with a strong downtown, and a talent pool that was there for the taking, frankly. You have every day over half the people that wake up in Mecosta County to go to work drive outside of Mecosta County to find work. And that trend line has been going in the wrong direction. Not as many people today live and work in the place that they live. And so that was an impetus for the company to consider, and others, frankly, to consider, could they encourage people to skip the commute and stay closer to home with a better paying job? And that's what drove a lot of the community support initially for this as well. As that year progressed, the company ended up finding a building elsewhere, and this particular phase of the project was abandoned. They didn't say specifically. I assume it was the Illinois site where they now operate a production facility that's up and open. About 400 people working there, as I understand it. In the spring of 22, the company returned with a second phase of the project. They were looking to assemble the battery component, or battery parts, or batteries themselves in this Illinois facility. They were now looking for a place to make components, the anode, the cathode, that are the core technology of a battery, looking for a domestic location for that. Having done the due diligence, having done the homework prior, the company honed in on Big Rapids. I'm sure they were looking at other sites, but in Michigan, that's the one they were looking at once again. For this project, for this phase 2 project, the land requirements were much greater. The investment was higher, the jobs were about the same, but the needs for the building were different. They had a taller building requirement for this particular phase, that whereas the Big Rapids Industrial Park was well served with infrastructure, well served by the interchange that's right there, It's at the end of an airport, a municipal airport, and not conducive for tall buildings, as you can imagine. So we looked for additional industrial land in the Big Rapids community, and immediately across the street from the Big Rapids Industrial Park and immediately across the street from the airport sits Green Township and 260 acres of zoned industrial land. That site looked prime, frankly, for a project like this. It was determined that it would work. It was put under contract, put under control, and the company went through additional due diligence. And by the end of the summer, that company was ready to move forward with that real estate. They were ready to finalize negotiations with the MEDC on the incentive package. And ultimately, in September of that year is when the first public vote took place, where both Big Rapids Township, Big Rapids Charter Township, Green Charter Township, and Mecosta County Board of Commission, September of 22, voted unanimously in support of the incentives for this project. Shortly thereafter, I think about a month later, the Michigan Strategic Fund Board approved it. In the following spring, the State Senate Appropriations and House Appropriations Committee both approved these as well. In the fall of 23, a recall election was held. The sitting Green Charter Township Board was largely overturned, not completely because you had some resignations that were not subject to recall. And in the aftermath of that, the township took some action. They felt the agreement was invalid. They took some action to violate the development agreement. The company has since brought suit. And today we find ourselves in a situation where the company, the community, and the courts are working their way through. So with that as the background, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Thalen, for your opening statements and your testimony coming in today. First question is, can you tell me how much money Gotion has received in terms of SSRP and CIP funding?
Yeah, there's 3 buckets to the incentive program. If you don't mind, I'll add one to your mix. So with the SOAR program, the traditional SOAR program, there's 2 elements. One is called the Critical Industry Program that was designed to incentivize companies directly. In that case, they have a $125 million allocation. The right place does not have an agreement in place on those funds. They don't flow through the right place. I don't know this specifically, but just knowing the project generally, $0 have been transferred of those 125 to date. The company has milestones that must be achieved. They haven't hit those yet, therefore the money has not been dispersed. The second piece of SOAR funding is called the Strategic Site Readiness Program. That was designed to fill a gap in site development. If you recall, when Ford Motor Company announced their project in Tennessee, part of their push was that Tennessee had a site ready to go with infrastructure served. Michigan was at a deficit, so this program was designed to solve for that deficit. In this case, $50 million was allocated from the Strategic Site Readiness Program to address land assembly and infrastructure costs. To date, if you allow a little bit of rounding, $23.7 million has been allocated for the project. The third bucket is the Renaissance Zone. That is a tax-free, property tax-free situation that has not triggered any value yet, as the company has not started their investment. So those would be the 3 primary incentive buckets in play.
Thank you. And where is Gotion on the permitting process?
Honestly, you would have to ask them, sir. I know they've had some fits and starts with that. I think right now my understanding is they're waiting for the courts to go finish their process.
Okay. Do you have any questions yet? I'll ask a couple more.
Please.
We see if you guys have any questions as well. So another question I have is, with Big Rapids, they were originally considering to locate Gotion in Big Rapids Township. Is that correct?
Correct.
And a CFIUS report was not done. Is that correct?
CFIUS is, I'm not a CFIUS expert, sir, so I can't speak to it too precisely. That was an issue that was raised in March timeframe of 2023, and I know that the company did file. I know they had basically a response that said that it was not applicable.
Was that something the community leaders wanted to see before they were going to allow Gotion to move to Big Rapids?
Yeah, Big Rapids Township in particular asked for that to take place. And again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a CFIUS expert. When I reviewed CFIUS, it has 3 basic components. It asks the question, is it close to a commercial airport? Is the property in question close to a commercial seaport? And is it close to a military installation? And in each of those, that property did not meet that threshold. And it was applied for, and that was the response back from CCPs.
And so that report wasn't done before Gotion started in Green Township, is that correct?
Yeah, you would have to ask the company that, sir. As I was told, those CFIUS reviews, if you have to check one of those three boxes, you have to go through the review. This site did not check one of those boxes, so I think they were assuming they didn't have to.
And this is something that runs all the way up to Janet Yellen with the Federal Reserve. Is that the case too in terms of approving whether or not this is done?
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
Okay. Looks like we have a question from Minority Vice Chair Legella.
Thanks for coming in. I just was curious. I imagine in your role at the right place, you've been around these kind of economic development deals quite often, and your role with MEDC prior. Have you seen the levels of pushback that we've seen with Green Township locally? Is that a common experience, or not as common, or is it becoming more common? I know the Marshall project had a lot of pushback as well. So just curious of what you've seen from your angle.
Yeah, no, I have seen certainly projects that have generated a lot of public pushback, a lot of public concern. I would suggest out of the gate, when this first became sort of engaged public process in September of 22 and beyond, the first few months of that effort, I would consider that pretty standard. The community dialogue that we had, especially in Big Rapids Township, which at the start was the bulk of the community dialogue, Costa County Commission, Green Charter Township, those initial 5 or 6 months had very little public participation. Not that it wasn't possible. The public hearings, public meetings took place. The public just wasn't there. The initial questions, and I was there at the vast majority of those public meetings, the initial questions I would say were pretty standard, pretty normal. People concerned about the environment, people concerned about their schools, concerned about traffic, concerned about infrastructure. China was a topic, but it was certainly not the topic. I went back this morning and looked. We cataloged all of the questions from those public hearings, 151 actually. Only 10 of them related to China in the fall and early parts of 2023, fall of 22 and early parts of 2023. Only after, in March, did it really start to become the topic that drove the discussion and took it to a level that I've not seen before.
Just a quick follow-up. What kind of outreach what kind of outreach happens when these public hearings are happening? Are people being sent mailers to their home? Are they being texted? Is it just something that's posted online? And then what was the general attendance early on?
Yeah, so these are public meetings, right? So they're posted properly and notified. This project had a lot of press coverage, so it certainly was covered that way as well. I know each township, Big Rapids Township and Green Charter Township, were actively communicating with their constituents. The initial attendance at a Big Rapids Township meeting would have been 60 to 80. As we got to the spring of 23, the numbers went to 150-ish. I would tell you, I attended the meeting in February of 23, just to illustrate this point a little bit further. In February of 23, I attended the Green Charter Township public meeting, public standard monthly meeting. There were 6 people in addition to myself there. Two people talked about their gravel roads needing improvement. One person talked about the need for collaboration among the city and the township, and one person complained or had issue with this project. 6 people in February of 2023. The next month we had 150. So something in that mix changed.
If I can just give a little grace. I know you mentioned you looked back through some of the early questions. Mm-hmm. Was there one that stuck out as like this was the number one thing people were asking about?
You know, I think the environmental and community impact concerns were top, and that's a big umbrella, of course. That includes traffic and schools and, you know, wetlands and all of those things. I can supply that list of questions if you'd like.
Thanks.
Sounds like the community was starting to become more aware of this, maybe September 2022 and or more recently than that. And people started coming out more. We have heard from other people, former township supervisor Jim Chapman. I heard him tell me directly that there was a silent majority who was in support of Gotion coming to the community. Do you have any indication from your end that would indicate that that's true?
Well, there's been plenty of surveys. I'm not sure many of them were terribly scientific. The one that I think best approximate that would be the recall election, when some won 58-42, some won 52-48. If you round those together, it was about 55-45 split in that community.
the best report I can speak towards, which is small, is my own. And I mentioned that last week when we had people coming to testify. There were 36 people that myself and 2 other state representatives talked to at the doors who gave us an answer. Very simply, do you support Gotion coming to town, yes or no? 30 were no, and 6 were yes. That, to me, is sufficient grounds from what we talked to say that there was not a silent majority in support. Yet we compelled the taxpayers of Michigan to fund a project for a community that doesn't even want it themselves. Does Gotion seem like one of the best market decisions the right place has made from your perspective, or one of the ones where maybe you've fallen short compared to other decisions the right place has made in the past?
Well, we don't make that decision, sir.
Advocate for this.
Yeah. And I think even advocacy is a bit strong. Our role is, we had a community at the time and elected officials at the time that wanted to see this project go forward. They wanted to see the jobs, they wanted to see the investment and the tax base that came with that. And we supported. Clearly, Big Rapids Township, as this process evolved, did not, and they took steps to avoid having to make a choice with their real estate. Green Township supervisor and board took a different path. They saw the opportunity for jobs and continued to pursue it.
We have a question from Vice Chair Green.
Thank you, sir. Okay, this might be a chicken and an egg situation. So I just want to make sure I understand this. So Big Rapids hired you for an economic development opportunity. Okay. Is that, am I understanding?
Yeah, without fee, so they asked us to come and assist, yes.
Okay, come and assist. And then, do you know who Chuck Thalen is?
I do now. At the time, I did not, and I've answered this plenty of times. We're not related.
I just want that for the record. Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
So you are not related to Chuck Thalen at all?
Not to my knowledge. I can just tell her the story. I asked my mother. She thought we were second cousins one time. A month later, she didn't think we were. I love my mom. She forgets. But I've never met Chuck. I didn't know him before. Never spoke with him. Never Snapchatted. Nothing.
Okay. I just want to clear that up.
Yeah, thank you.
That's one question while we're on that topic. There is another Thalen involved in this process. That's a Tracy Thalen. Do you know who Tracy Thalen is?
Is that Chuck's wife?
Might be.
I think so.
She seems to know Jim Chapman enough to give him a 4-figure contribution.
That's true.
Yeah, I can't speak to that.
Okay. Seeing no further questions from the committee, I appreciate you coming in today, Mr. Thalen.
Yeah, thank you
for your testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Next, we will hear from Mr. Joseph Sella. He is the former United States Ambassador to Fiji. He will come up and testify. Look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Morning, Chairman Carr, Majority Vice Chair Green, and Minority Vice Chair Wagela. Committee members and citizen activists present, it's an honor to appear before you today. I'd like to thank Speaker Matt Hall for his pioneering leadership in establishing the Oversight Committee structure, the subpoena power that is raising the bar for government accountability and transparency to the taxpayer that has suffered mightily over the last several years. It's putting an important focus on the judgments, decisions, and a so-called deal, Governor Whitmer, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, the right place, and Fair State University, some legislators and local elected officials concocted and championed not only to the peril of open government taxpayer dollars, but also vitally our national security. I come to you as a former U.S. ambassador to 5 South Pacific Island nations, well aware of the adversarial engagements of China and its government, the Chinese Communist Party, and the subnational incursions, malign influence, operations, and other threats that they present throughout the world into the United States. I serve as co-founder and director of the Michigan-China Economic and Security Review Group. We are on a mission to monitor, assess, and report on the threats, potential threats, or emerging threats from China, the CCP, its entities, affiliates, or their associates, including China-based companies, through subnational incursions and presence in other forms, and assist in mitigating and reducing the threats to the state of Michigan. This work has been done and continues to be done on a bipartisan basis, educating local and state elected officials, federal elected officials, citizens, helping in the protection of our state and national security, ensuring Article 1, Section 1 of the Michigan Constitution and the charge of the preamble of the Constitution of the United States are upheld and fortified for the security and protection of our citizens and to provide for our common defense. I'm gravely concerned with the aggressive pursuit by certain elected officials and appointed leaders in the state of Michigan, economic development entities, and local officials to go all out to bring China-based and CCP-tied Gotion to our beloved state of Michigan. The fight against Gotion and my work through the MCSRG would not have been possible without those who have the hardest job, the everyday American citizen activists who are on the front lines of this fight in Mecosta County, and the indispensable counsel and work with my former ambassadorial colleague, Peter Hoekstra, who co-founded the group with me. It's certainly been a blessing to work with all of them. The importance of your hearing today and the gravity of the matter cannot be overstated. In February of 22, U.S. intelligence agencies convened a bipartisan group of state and local elected officials warning them of the national security threat such deals as the Gotion deal with China-based and Communist Party-tied companies present. 5 months later, they declassified this memo involving that meeting. The memo offers directives, and this is the memo incidentally, offers directives for our government officials, appointed officials, to perform strict scrutiny and due diligence on such deals with China-based entities. One cannot help but wonder if any Michigan officials attended the meeting, and if so, why they did not heed their warnings and the directives, for they did really zero serious due diligence when it came to this deal, including the very basic first step of the CFIUS review, considering the malign activities of China. In February of 23, volunteer citizens activists across Michigan began asking important questions, never asked questions about the Gotion deal. Soon thereafter, they mobilized after the request for information had been denied, often from fellow local elected officials. Their questions went unanswered, and they received assurances by the MEDC in committee hearings that the due diligence had been done. Citizens have fought back and continue to fight back, seeking a redress of their unheard grievances, whether through successful referendum and recall processes, and now, unfortunately, through litigation. The national threat from the PRC, from China and the CCP, whether through espionage or intellectual property theft and beyond, has existed since China opened up to the world in 1972. However, in the last 10 years, you could say 20 years, China and the CCP have scaled their subnational incursions, become more complex and furtive, and correspondingly, the national security threat has scaled. When we first raised the concern about the national security threat from Chinese-based Communist Party-tied companies, backers of this deal and other deals ignored them or dismissed them, essentially said, how could espionage possibly happen? We have 50 Chinese companies operating in Michigan now, and later that number was corrected to 300. It's important to remember that Articles 7, 9 through 14 of the China's National Intelligence Law require employees of PRC-based companies to surveil, collect, and report, in other words, conduct espionage, as directed or on their own volition, and sometimes that happens for remuneration, money, or other vehicles. Some history. In 2003, the Plymouth-based automotive components company Metaldyne opened an office in Shanghai as a prelude to establishing a manufacturing presence in the country. The office supported sales, technical manufacturing capabilities in the country, along with purchasing activity for their global market demands. Two years later, two former employees of Metaldyne, Ann Lockwood of Michigan and Fuping Liu, a U.S. citizen living in Shanghai, were arrested and charged by the FBI with conspiracy to steal and transmit trade secrets. 1 year later, they, along with a third former employee, Lockwood's husband, Michael Hanel, were indicted for stealing trade secrets for a Chinese competitor. 2 years later, they pled guilty to felony. They were sentenced to prison for their crimes. In February of 2019, Dr. Xiaorong Yu, a.k.a. Shannon Yu of Lansing, a China-born scientist, was arrested in Michigan and interviewed by FBI agents in their Grand Rapids field office. Yu was charged with stealing $120 million in trade secrets related to BPA-free coatings inside of Coca-Cola cans for the China-based Weihai Jihong Group Company Limited, for whom her co-conspirator co-conspirator Liu Xinjiang works. 2 years later, Liu was found guilty of conspiracy to commit trade secret theft, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, possession of stolen trade secrets, economic espionage, and wire fraud. In 2022, Yu was sentenced to 14 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release in order to pay a $200,000 fine. Both Fuping Liu and Dr. Shouram Yu were both a part of the China and CCP 1,000 Talents Program, otherwise known as Overseas High-Level Talent Recruitment Programs, which lures Chinese experts in science and technology from abroad back to China, often rewarding these individuals with cash payments of tens of thousands of dollars or other investments for stealing trade secrets and or intellectual property. China-based and CCP-type companies reap priceless benefits, as does the government, provincial and city governments in China, as well as the CCP. Should the Gotion deal ever come to fruition in Michigan, it will really only be a matter of time before espionage commences. Some say it already has. At a hearing of the Select Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, Congressman John Molinar, now the chairman of the Select Committee, asked Bill Evanina, the former director of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, about the likelihood Chinese nationals would spy in plants such as the one in his district. Evanina responded, 100%. The threat is so clear and present that in July of 23, the FBI announced China is targeting universities, business, and government research facilities to steal cutting-edge AI research and products. This is yet another glaring example of the utter lack of strict scrutiny and due diligence of these deals by the state and the MEDC and other supporters and collaborators imperils our national security. Ironically, the following month, Governor Whitmer was at Camp Grayling reviewing our National Guard troops. And days later, 5 University of Michigan engineering graduate students from China were found spying on Operation Northern Strike, where Taiwanese troops were present along with other international troops in an annual exercise. This is roughly 50 miles from the proposed Gotion location. These students were later arrested and charged by the FBI for conducting espionage and soon thereafter fled to China, never to return. Defending the state and its national security from the threat of espionage is one of Michigan's most important tasks. I thank you for your leadership on this on a bipartisan basis. It calls into question, apart from the economic models you're rightly debating, whether these products should be even permitted on our shores. I'm grateful for your leadership in shedding light on this corrupted deal and working towards getting ourselves on the footing commensurate with the threat that China and the Chinese Communist Party presents to Michigan and our country. I appreciate your time and attention. I appreciate this opportunity and would be delighted to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sella. I'll start with the first question and then open it up to committee members. Do you know what the CPA-FFC is? That is the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries?
Sure. I would say it's a vehicle to conduct espionage by a friendly name, and they are deeply integrated throughout the United States and the rest of the world, looking for collaborations with sister city arrangements in Michigan and beyond other states. And look to build relationships within universities as well. Highly perilous structure that were given strict scrutiny during the Trump administration. Many of them disappeared as a result of that, and that scrutiny rightly continues. And I would argue that you're in a unique position in your respective offices to play a role at the state level, asking very hard questions, using your subpoena authority and committee convening authority to ask these very hard questions where their presence may be known.
And do you believe that the CCP tries to use different ways to leverage relationships with local elected officials, maybe starting more at the township level or county commission level, who may end up eventually being elected officials who might run for legislative positions in the future? Is that a tactic that is known to be used?
100%. And I would say that both this deal and the cattle deal down in Marshall, I think, have all the hallmarks of subnational incursions by this Chinese-based company. They have their CEO leads their employees in an oath of fealty to the Chinese Communist Party. In that pledge, they said they would die for the Chinese Communist Party. So this is not a partisan thing. National security should always be nonpartisan, bipartisan. And we're certainly catching up with the threat that kind of snuck up on us. I think we talk all day long about the nature of it. I mean, certainly Wall Street has profited. We as consumers have profited from lower prices. However, it cannot be overstated of the risk and the peril of that our connection to China, particularly in realms of tech and precious minerals, and how that really undermines our national security. It's a great time to really heighten the awareness and education information, because I think to get onto the proper footing commensurate with this threat, it has to be a whole of society, whole of government engagement.
And is it possible that some of these elected officials may be unwitting to this overall plan or strategy the CCP may have, where they're just looking at dollars and cents, or looking at maybe having aspirations and building relationships for fundraising efforts, but basically just saying this is a project that if I bring the community is going to create jobs and bring all this opportunity to our community, and they start looking at it in those types of ways and just convince themselves that they're doing the right thing and unwittingly are complicit in an overall operation that's far bigger than they realize.
You make a great point, Chairman Carr. I would say both witting and unwitting. I can tell you that I testified with the Senate Appropriations Committee, where Mr. Thalen had testified also, or was present for testimony, and as he was walking out, former Big Rapids Township trustee Carmen Bean was there, and he said, "What do you want from Gotion?" I mean, again, this is textbook kind of communication of what happens, because Gotion it was revealed that Gotion had, in court filings, it was shown that Gotion had offered tickets for golf outings and trips to China. They also offered a purchase well beyond market price for a sitting Green Charter Township trustee. And if not in the letter, certainly in the spirit of something that is sideways, I would say, of federal and state anti-corruption laws. So this does happen. I will say, in fairness, this is not a partisan thing. In the very red state of North Dakota, you had elected officials advocating for the purchase, the transaction of 300 acres of farmland to bring in a food additive processor known as FUFED. Again, the locals there, like here in Michigan, knew something was awry and started asking the very difficult questions that were never asked. Thankfully, they did ask them, and happily they got the results. So the fact of this deal was that it was 10 miles from the very classified Grand Forks Air Force Base, where some of our most advanced hypersonic work is being done, and other work, and it is necessarily a threat. It got right to the river's edge of this deal coming to fruition, but for the engagement of former former Senator Marco Rubio and the North Dakota Senators Kramer and Hoban. And it took a single act by an Air Force officer who oversees real estate transactions to deny it, saying it was a grave national security threat. So, again, wittingly or unwittingly, these things do happen, and I appreciate your leadership, that of Speaker Hall and your legislative colleagues on both sides of the aisle, to really illuminate the nature of this threat, because we're ostensibly in a Cold War. We're catching up with the lay of the terrain, and this is an important and a powerful educational moment that you're doing, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you, and appreciate you being a part of it, Mr. Sala. We have another question from Vice Chair Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Being here, welcome.
Thank you.
Do you know who the parent company of Gotion is?
Gotion, G-O-U, I think X-U-A-N, High Tech Limited, based in Hefei, China.
Okay. Are you familiar with the company's bylaws?
I have read the bylaws. Mm-hmm.
So is there anything in their bylaws that, in particular, that stand out to you?
Sure. I mean, again, it pledges their fealty to the Chinese Communist Party, and therein the Constitution of China, which, I mean, the government of government of China is the Chinese Communist Party. So it is really a blind allegiance to that and all that it represents, including its malign influences that we've seen here on our own shores in Michigan.
Are you also aware of some documents that China has put out? I'm trying to remember the name of it, on how they plan on taking over technology. I've actually written some op-eds on this previously, given my background in the military. So do you actually believe that having a Chinese-based company in Michigan, especially where we are the engineering headquarters for all of our ground combat systems, could be a potential threat to national security?
Certainly, thank you for your service to our country. Several years ago, FBI Christopher Wray, former FBI Director Christopher Wray revealed and warned of the massive transfer of wealth from the United States that is underway through intellectual property theft via China. It's the greatest transfer of wealth in our nation's history, totaling anywhere from $250 billion to $600 billion a year. So we're entering into this conversation, and I think the new Trump administration will pick up where it left off, and to a degree the Biden administration, in terms of having an awareness on high tech and critical minerals, where some things just might need to be decoupled or de-risked at minimum. In this instance of Gotion and cattle, I think that was a textbook moment that Governor Whitmer, MEDC, the right place, should have de-risked, and they did not. They dammed the torpedoes and plowed full speed ahead without asking any serious questions. But happily, you saw it manifested in the patriotic citizens who did ask those hard questions, and we are now where we are as a result of that. And I don't think we would be there if they, who suffered, I would say, the rupturing of the consent of the government, did not speak up. Another just parenthetical point that I would make to you, former Secretary of Defense, Director of the CIA, Clinton Chief of Staff Leon Panetta was before Chairman Molinar, who asked a question of him last year about the Gotion deal, and Secretary Panetta responded about the threat that Gotion presents, and he said, quote, "I don't think there's any question they're going to take advantage of the situation. I think we have to be very vigilant about what the hell is going on." And I think fair to say not many knew what the hell was going on with this deal and others. The Secretary of State, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in that same hearing said, when pressed on the same question, he said that I think it's worse than the fact that they will engage in espionage. I think it's just the top of the list. They will use this in ways that will leverage Chinese advantage. These plants are deeply dangerous to our national security and ought not be built. And in fact, the Biden administration proposed a rule that added over 50 military installations to the CFIUS list. And guess what was added? Camp Grayling. So now, happy to hear that some of the locals are pushing for a second CFIUS review. And I think I think it's fair to say that as a result of that added rule, it will necessarily be given the full treatment that it needed to given by the Treasury Department and Secretary Bessent, and not just summarily dismissed as an uncovered real estate transaction, because this is certainly a covered transaction now because of the mission critical assets that are there.
Can you explain what CFIUS is for those folks?
Sure. So it's a relic of Gerald R. Ford administration. It is an acronym that stands for the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. It's not just for China; it's for other malign actors: Iran, North Korea, Russia, Venezuela. And I would say that over time, the Leviathan of government grows. I think you have some transient staff that come and go. I think you have some staff that just stay there and become staid and lose sight of the mission and don't adjust to the contours of the threat. I think we really need to be contemporized with the threats that are out there. I don't think CFIUS is. I think I'm not a bellicose person. I'm not a warmonger, but we have to fight the good fight and provide for our common defense. And I think these things You were a warfighter once, Representative, and I think that these things really need to be looked at through a warfighting lens and prepare for peace and ask these hard questions so we can provide for our military, their protection, and the nature of the work that they have at hand. So I trust Secretary Bessent will take steps to improve CFIUS from where it is, but it's a mechanism for parties involved with transactions, such as governments or states, to petition for a review of the particular transaction. You're asked questions about parties' names to the transaction, their passports, where they live. And that can be very revealing because all the intergovernment agency has a seat at the table for this data. So FBI, intelligence agencies, they can do deep dives and find out information not available or open source. And I did not unfortunately get that far. It was summarily dismissed as an uncovered real estate transaction, which again is I think a very myopic decision. I do think that the aperture of the lens is now widened, and perhaps if the review does happen, I know it will be given a stricter scrutiny with that wider aperture, and certainly with the presence of Camp Grayling now on the Treasury's list requiring a review. Welcome.
We have time for a couple more questions here. Next one from Representative Pahatsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If Gotion and companies like it are as much of a national security risk as you've asserted, why did the Trump campaign take $1 million for their inauguration from Gotion?
Well, I can't speak for the Trump campaign or the inaugural committee. I can say that Google also made a $1 million contribution, and they had business before the Department of Justice, and the Trump Justice Department rendered a decision, I guarantee you, that did not please Google. So I can't speak for that, but I think that it's a matter of the nature of these moments when contributions come in. I don't think that much weight should be given to it, but the citizens have been vigilant, and I know they'll continue to be vigilant on such questions.
In your opinion, does that fall into the witting or unwitting bucket of public officials being influenced by these companies?
I don't know if there were any public officials that
the president
reviewed over.
One of them.
I doubt that the president knew that even happened.
He should now, though, right?
Perhaps so. I mean, it's in the public domain now, but I don't think it should be overstated. I think that you look back at the Biden administration, the Obama administration, and similar questions could be asked as well.
Next question from Representative Beerline.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ambassador, for being here. You mentioned 300 some odd companies in the state of Michigan with ties to China. Is that, in your experience, that similar to other nations? Is it higher? And what kind of industries are they engaged in?
Great question. Representative, thanks for the question. That number came from the MEDC, and it may have gone up yet further since then. When we first brought Gotion and the cattle deals to light in 2023, I would say that, again, the previous witness cited the global economy, but I think that with that global economy, you can't use that as justification for engaging these companies without asking the hard questions, as advised by our national security and intelligence agencies. Malign actors will always remain malign, and you need to do the work necessary to do it, and you're doing it here today, and I'm grateful for it. So I will say that there is another company that I think entered in to the western part of the state, I want to say near Greenville, known as Dicastal. And if you look up Dicastal and Greenville, Chinese-based company, I believe they're a wheel manufacturer for domestic automakers as well as European automakers. In their time here, there has been an explosion, there's been a fire at the plant, and they are under investigation by the FBI. and the FBI has not really divulged why, but I would say it is, and there are Chinese nationals present there doing the work. But again, this is just another example of how I think we can de-risk and decouple, and in other instances, depending on the technology, from these companies. No need to overreact, but I think it's just a prudential adjustment of our footing commensurate with the threat, particularly when it comes to the super high-tech realm. And I think you cannot ignore history ever. And I think there are some other companies to be concerned about as well beyond Dicastal in Michigan. And that would just take a little bit more homework by your good offices.
Last question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
Hi, thanks for coming in. First, I think it's been pretty clear here in Lansing, but I oppose giving any public dollars to any private organization.
Thank you.
Regardless of country of origin. And then we don't need to debate this, but I just want to state, I don't believe China is really a communist country in the sense of what communism stands for. Certainly it's authoritarian. I'm not saying we shouldn't have some concerns. I just think the misclassification of that term is important to point out for the academic sense of what that term is. The second thing I'll just bring up is, in 1961, this came out recently with the JFK files, it was revealed that I think half of the U.S. political officers around the world were actually intelligence officers spying, and in some case on allies. So I think it's fair to assume that our allies and our opponents are spying on us in some way. That's the nature of intelligence business around the world. That being said, here's where I'm going with this. Gotion is a U.S. subsidiary of a Chinese company, Gotion High Tech, and I think that we have this question we have to ask ourselves of making sure we have our national security safe, because I think we all believe that. But then also the reality is with some of these technologies, China has they're better at it than us, right? For example, EV technology. I believe they've just come out with a 5-minute charger. And I'm somebody who believes that climate change is an existential threat to society and the world. I know we don't all agree on that, but the point I'm making is, where is the balance in your view between things that potentially help save the planet or save someone else if it's a medical technology? At what point do we work with China on these things, and what point do we not? And I would never advocate to give one of their companies or any company private or public dollars. But I think it's an important question for, are you advocating that no Chinese company should operate in the United States at all? Or are you saying it's situational depending on circumstances?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, back to the decoupling and de-risking, I think standards do exist, and I think they need to be tightened and applied. And in this instance, they were not. I will tell you that Congresswoman Stevens, Gallagher, and Molinar met with Jim Farley about the cattle deal in Marshall, and he told them, look, we are so far behind in China. They are so great. They are so awesome. Without this deal, we will never catch up. I don't believe that. They quickly pivoted to shift towards hydrogen and hybrid with a lot of money. And shortly after that, they stood up their quote-unquote skunk works. And they made great success, yet they remain all in with this deal with China. At great peril, I would argue, because that's closer to the Battle Creek Air National Guard base, where there are mission-critical assets, and Fort Custer. None of that was considered by anybody locally or at the state when it came to these deals. So it has to be prudence. These have to be, I think, the aperture of the standards of the technology that you pointed out need to be considered. And even if it is kind of a safe technology, if you want to say, or product, let's just say the Dicastal rims. Remember that in the backdrop, you have the PRC National Intelligence Law that requires all Chinese citizens, whether at home or abroad, to surveil, collect, and report. In other words, conduct espionage, whether as directed by the Ministry of State Security or on their own volition, sometimes for remuneration and other times not. And I don't think that we should lose sight of that, because something apparently innocent could be not so innocent.
Very good. Well, thank you for your testimony, Mr. Seller. Appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Next, we will hear from John Mazzina from the Center of Economic Accountability. If you'll come up and give your opening testimony, we'll look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Mazzina.
Thank you, Chair Kara, Vice Chair Green, Chair Viola, members of the committee. My name is John Bozino. I'm the president of the Center for Economic Accountability. We are a nonpartisan 501c3 that works across the country for transparency, accountability, and market-based reforms of state and municipal economic development programs. As such, I'd actually like to echo the ambassador in my pleasure in having this committee to testify to for Speaker Hall and for others who felt the need to not only create a committee that to perform oversight over economic development in Michigan, but also to fill it with members who take that oversight responsibility seriously and have proven so over time. I am a Michigan resident. The CEA is based here in Michigan, but my comments today draw on our experience working across the country on economic development policy at the state and municipal level over the past 6 years, as well as my own decades worth of personal experience in the what I now know as the private sector. At the time, I thought of it as having a job in the other places, including the automotive and battery industries. I spent a lot of time behind the scenes of these kinds of deals over the years in that real world that we hear about all the time from the subsidy cheerleaders. The CEA has been opposed to SOAR since before its inception. In 2022, as this legislature was considering the bills that would become SOAR, I testified to the Senate Economic Development Committee, and I warned them, quote, "To be blunt, these bills would have the practical effect of creating an auto industry slush fund." Creating an auto industry slush fund. Using money that instead should be either paying for essential public services or left in taxpayers' pockets. Committee chair and SOAR bill sponsor Senator Ken Horn was not happy. He told me that he was personally offended by my testimony, but the next day I received an email from an MEDC staffer who asked to remain nameless, and they wrote me, I quote, "I was watching your testimony before the Senate Economic and Small Business Development Committee on June 9th, and I was moved by your bluntness. I don't find it offensive to call SOAR the fund what it is, i.e. a rose by any other name. MEDC has stated a desire to pursue more equitable job growth, and I joined the organization in that year with the hope that I could make a difference. I've become disappointed that I'm tying my name and reputation to an organization that is fighting to give our money away to Fortune 500 corporations that have no loyalty to place or people," unquote. And the reason I share this with you is I think this committee would do well to be aware that there may very well be a difference between what the corporate official positions are of the MEDC, the Right Place, and all of the other economic development agencies around the country, versus what the mission-driven career professionals in those organizations may think would actually be the best way to do economic development. Thing is they generally know that these deals don't work the way they're being sold to you and to taxpayers. For instance, the MEDC's recent presentation on SOAR to this committee argued that Michigan, quote, lost, unquote, projects like Intel to Ohio, Micron to New York, or Hyundai to Georgia because we didn't throw enough subsidies at them. What they don't talk about is all the times we offered more in subsidies than the winning state. They don't talk about the way that, for instance, Amazon's famous HQ2 left billions of dollars in offered subsidies on the table from New Jersey and Maryland rather than move less than 10 miles away from their preferred sites in New York and Virginia. And they don't talk about the way that Amazon pulled out of the New York City HQ2 deal rather than deal with the politics that were intended upon taking that money, and instead spent $1 billion of its own money to buy the former Lord & Taylor flagship store on Fifth Avenue and turn it into its own New York City headquarters. We have example after example after example of that mechanism going across the country where big subsidies failed to land the deal. And the reason for that is that the fundamental truth of subsidies like SOAR, like the one that we're looking at today, the subsidies do very little to change businesses' decisions. It's not that they don't matter at all, it's certainly not true. But the reality is that they are only one of a number of factors that go into businesses' site selection decisions. And they're essentially never the top priority. Mr. Thalen testified to that very clearly, talking about the scouring of the country that Gotion was going through, trying to find the right place to put its various operations. This isn't some sort of ivory tower, egghead, partisan argument. It's actually what the site selection industry itself says. For the past 39 years, Area Development Magazine, sort of the paper of record of the site selection industry, has surveyed corporate site selectors about what factors they're prioritizing in their decisions about what to build and where. In their most recent survey, state and local incentives came in at 9th in importance, below factors like energy availability and cost, workforce, permitting regulations, proximity to suppliers, tax rates, those sorts of things. In general, recent years, state and local incentives sort of float in between roughly 8th and 12th in the area development annual surveys. So what does that mean for this committee, both in general and specifically when it comes to looking at the Gotion deal? Because the accounting that you're being shown for these per job costs and the benefits and the ROI of these subsidies assumes that 100% of the costs and benefits of the related jobs and tax revenues should be allocated to the subsidy. You're being told, oh, well, if it's $1 million subsidy and we get $1 million back in tax revenues, it's zero back. Well, but what if, in fact, the subsidy was just half of the decision? What if it was one of two equal factors that was what made Gotion make this decision? In that case, you've got $1 million subsidy, but you can only allocate half of the benefits to it, which means that you are suddenly negative ROI on that subsidy. Or if it's as the site selection industry itself says, that these are somewhere in the 8th to 12th or whatever most important thing that goes into the decision, then all of a sudden the actual ROI, the actual return on the investment that you're making with taxpayer dollars is very, very, very different than you are being told by these agencies. A month ago, the MEDC came in here and said that Gotion was getting a $125 million grant, Renaissance Zone worth estimated $540 million, $50 million site prep grant that Mr. Thiel talked about. That's $715 million by the MEDC's own math, works out to a bit more than $300,000 for each of the promised jobs. To be clear, that's a terrible deal. We should just stop there. $300,000 a job is just not sustainable, and that should have been enough. But that's assuming that $300,000 a job is that the subsidy was the only thing that made Gotion move here. And we know from Mr. Thalen's testimony of everything that went into this and all the things that went into this factor that that's not true. Things the dollars and cents costs aren't the only thing that we need to consider. Back in January of 2023, I was invited by 2 township board members to Big Rapids Township community meeting to speak to the community back before Big Rapids made the decision to change. The question came up earlier of what changed, why all of a sudden were more people at the meeting. I think some of it was, as these township board members said, they were not experts in this topic, and they were concerned that they were only hearing one side. They're like, well, we're sort of vaguely aware that there's some folks who don't think these things are a great deal. So they invited me and other folks who've talked and written and spoken about this to come in and give sort of a little bit of equal time and to talk to the community. And I like to hope that at least part of what we said went into the decision, Big Rapids, to not move forward with that. But one of the most important decisions that I had there came with a local owner of an auto repair shop. His primary concern was that his business relied on 4 mechanics with whom he had invested over the years in training, sending them off to courses, so making sure that they were ready to do things like repair battery and hybrid vehicles, and that all the computer stuff, that they were able to compete for customers in the marketplace because he'd invested in the training of his workers. And he said, if Gotion comes to town, my guys are going to be some of the first people they try to hire away. Because he knew exactly, very full well, just how many of these kinds of mechanics there were in that market, what the competition was for him, and what he had to do to keep them happy and keep them working for him. And he said, it's one thing if a company comes in, they compete, they make a better deal with my employees, that's just business. But the thing is, they're going to be paying these guys, they're going to be trying to steal them away with my tax dollars. But it was the subsidy that was the issue, not potentially losing the employees, but the fact that this company was going to be competing with a subsidized dollar, and that was going to be happening over and over and over again in the region. That all the employees, high net worth, skilled workers that a company like Gotion is going to need, Very few of those folks are unemployed right now. And overwhelmingly, that's what we see over and over again in economic development. The job creation, I would imagine Goshen is going to be hiring very, very few currently unemployed people. Rather, you're not subsidizing job creation as much as you are job shuffling of artificial competition, government-subsidized competition, inflationary government-subsidized competition for workers who are already having jobs and who are out there, being productive members of the local community. The issue is that between the ROI, between this job stuff, between all of the issues that Ambassador Sull and others have talked about, the environmental issues that were touched on briefly, this Goshen deal has all of the earmarks of the deals that I see increasingly. I talked about this in Marshall when I was asked to go testify there to the city council meeting, because the people there said that they needed somebody who was wearing a suit on their side. So everybody with a suit was on the other side. They needed somebody with a suit to talk on behalf of the community. This is a deal that is happening to this community and not for this community. Economic development should be happening for our communities and not to them. That's not what's happening in this case, and I'm more than happy to talk about that further in response to any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Messina. I have a quick question for you. When they make arguments suggesting that it's going to create jobs when they pour millions and millions of dollars into a local community and try to justify how it's going to trickle down and help the community at large, you bring forward a very compelling point about the business owner who may lose an employee who's done great there but can't afford to pay him as much as this company who comes in and gets these millions of dollars flush with cash can afford to pay him, so they're going to steal an employee. Meanwhile, we're compelling taxpayers from around the state to fund this project. And how much economic loss happens because $20 from this individual, $50 from this individual, $100 from this individual, all these people, 10 million people around the state compelled to chip in for this handout instead of spending money at their local grocery store, a little bit of extra money, buying a nicer steak that night, or going to a baseball game, or enjoying some type of economic activity elsewhere. All that goes unseen. And are you convinced that these economic models that are used to determine where we're going to make these market decisions and corporate handouts have properly investigated all that adding up of loss throughout the state?
No, and you make a very, very good point. It's a sort of fundamental economics point. It goes back to the 1800s, the idea of the seen and the unseen, and that it's very easy for us to look at the things we see. We see the new factory. We see the people working there. It sounds good, but as you said, what you don't see is the company that those workers got hired away from. You don't see the tax dollars, what could have happened elsewhere with the tax dollars, whether it's the individual's family's tax dollars or whether it's a company's tax dollars that then couldn't be used to hire another worker, invest in more production, invest in building their own expansion. All of those things are very true. And while I don't claim to be an academic expert in the tools that are used, I certainly know that the REMI and the implant and things along those lines, I do know that there are very much concerns about the fact that they are based on, among other things, historical knowledge, and they don't take into the account, or often don't take into account, the sort of but-for, the substitution effect, what otherwise could have happened. It just sort of says, if you do this, then what happens? It doesn't ask the question, if you have a company that now is going to be doing business here, employing this number of people, spending this much money on inputs, what will be the economic output? And it can do a relatively decent job of doing that. It does not ask, is that the best use of this money? Would things be perfectly good if that didn't happen and instead that money got left with taxpayers? Those don't get modeled. And that goes to a fundamental issue with all of these sorts of programs, sort of the deeper issues that this is, we use the word socialism a lot sometimes to sort of mean things we don't like. And some people use the word socialism to describe things they do like. But I think we can all agree that when a government is taking a financial stake in literal means of production like factories, that it's getting pretty close to the kind of socialism that I learned about 30 some odd years ago in my political science classes. And that one of the great lessons of the past century was that governments are really bad at central economic planning. And the argument that, oh, we have to be doing these subsidies or all the jobs and all the business and all the prosperity are going to go someplace else, that we must have these bureaucrats, whether they be in Lansing or Detroit or Grand Rapids or anywhere, that we have to have these folks micromanaging our local economies or all the prosperity is going to go someplace else, is the argument that we need to be East Germany instead of West Germany. We need to be North Korea instead of South Korea. We have to have those central planners or all the jobs and all the prosperity is going someplace else. That's just counter to everything that we learned from Economics 101 on, as well as the lessons of the past century of history where we tried economic planning in various forms and failed every time to create meaningful, widespread, sustainable prosperity for our communities.
Who benefits from these types of central planning decisions?
Well, I mean, certainly the companies that receive the subsidy, even though there is some research that suggests that companies that take these bills don't necessarily always do that well, and so that is the idea that they're taking their eye off the ball, that they're focusing too much on keeping government happy and not enough on keeping customers happy. Obviously, to be blunt, the bureaucrats who are employed to manage the programs. And quite frankly, politicians, elected officials. There is very good research that shows that especially governors, but also legislators, that a swing state governor, this is research done by professors at Duke and the University of Texas at Austin that found that a swing state governor who can take credit for, quote, winning, unquote, 1,000 manufacturing jobs through a subsidy doesn't really move the partisan voters on either side, but it can move independent voter intent by as much as 9%. In a re-election campaign. That's who's benefiting.
Right, and some politicians, do you have any evidence where maybe somebody who's in that swing district and wants to get re-elected, if they do these types of programs, might possibly be getting campaign contributions?
That certainly happens. There was research done by, if I remember correctly, researchers at Penn State and Northwestern universities that found that companies that make campaign contributions to the relevant elected officials are something on the order of 4 times more likely to receive a contribution than the companies that did not, and those subsidies are, again, this is from memory, it's something like 63% larger on average. There's also some work done by some professors I know at the Citadel and College of Charleston that found that elected officials who are more active in engaging with economic development programs receive more in-campaign contributions and have a higher margin of victory on election day than those who don't. I always feel sort of weird saying that folks like you can use it for evil. I hope you will not. But one of the phrases that I say all the time is that the purpose of these programs at the end of the day is not to create jobs. It's to make voters believe that politicians are responsible for creating jobs. And if you look at it through the lens of political science, it makes a lot of sense. All of the things that make no economic sense suddenly are explained because these are political tools and not economic tools.
Very good. Thank you. Next question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
First off, I just want to say, democratic socialist, I think workers having democratic control of workplaces is a good thing. But that's not what is happening here, right? What I would call this is corporatism, which was also a main tenet of Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini's regime, right? It's like corporations working in partnership with the state is a key component of fascism. That being said, my question is related to, you talked about like how a lot of times the government will use these, or politicians will use these deals as wins. A lot of times I actually see them as like bullets dodged. And what I mean by that, and I would love if you could talk about this, we offered, I think, $7.3 billion of public taxpayer money to Foxconn, who has gone to Wisconsin. And I don't know, I'm assuming you have studied this. I would love if you could talk a little bit about the disaster that's created for Wisconsin and how we actually are lucky that we did not have Foxconn coming.
Yeah, very much so. And to your point about socialism, I often quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I don't know that he came up with it, but he certainly said it multiple times. that in America all too often we have socialism for the rich and rugged free market capitalism for the poor. That is a perfect description of the way we do economic development far too often in this country. Yes, Foxconn was absolutely a bullet dodged, although that was sort of losing the Foxconn competition was one of the things that the MEDC and Business Leaders for Michigan and all the other subsidy cheerleaders around used to push various subsidy programs and say, oh, we have to have these or we're going to keep on losing these deals. I mean, we should be so lucky, whether it was Foxconn, whether it was Amazon's HQ2. Foxconn, it was a situation where, as of right now, there's essentially nothing there. It's doubtful. I mean, there's like one building that's a weird sort of golf ball looking thing that's like a conference center or something like that. They still don't quite know. They think they actually had it rezoned to be used as the site to be used as a warehouse. I haven't followed every detail in the most recent year, so I don't claim to know exactly all the details of what's things going on. It was, frankly, arguably the first economic development deal to go so badly that it actually lost a governor a job or contributed to losing a governor a job, which in and of itself was a fairly unusual occurrence to have happen. But I mean, people lost family farms and homes to Foxconn. Even if the money sort of never went out the door, the state and the local governments used their power of eminent domain to take property from people that had been in families for generations in preparation for this giant, beautiful thing that then never happened because of changing market forces, changing things. That's one of the things that I talk about all the time. We saw that with Ford and CATL and Marshall on the change. We saw that with General Motors and LG Chem and the battery factory, that business needs change, business plans change, the market changes so fast and so unpredictably that the claimed ability of these agencies to be able to say, oh, well, we know that it will create X number of jobs and X number of revenues down to significant figures. I mean, if these agencies were actually able to reliably make these predictions about what a specific investment would do to a specific company's long-term, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, they wouldn't be making civil service salaries in Lansing or elsewhere. They'd be making millions or billions in Wall Street and hedge funds or whatever, because those are the kinds of things that there's a giant industry that tries to do and gets it wrong more often than not. If you talk to actual economists in the world, actual academic economists, the kinds of predictions that these agencies make on a daily basis in their economic impact statements are not economics. They are not things that the tools of the discipline of economics says that you should be able to do. It's not possible to make those predictions, and yet they do so over and over and over again.
Last question for you. When the MEDC was in here last week, I asked them, when we take money, millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars from the people of Michigan and give it to certain privileged corporations, picking who receives that money, is that more of a free market process or more of a central planning process? They said it was a free market process. What say you?
I would say that that's not any free market with which I am personally familiar. I mean, it's you literally have, like I said, you have government agents making decisions about making a financial investment in in legitimate, actual means of production, factories and the like. That's what that is, and you can be pro or con free markets or socialism, but again, even if you wanted to do a really well-planned economy, that ain't the way to do it. The questions of corruption came up, and there's all over the country. There's plenty of examples of really sort of egregious corruption that happens when you have millions or billions of dollars changing hands in deals that are made behind closed doors, where there are FOIA exemptions built into the law so that you can't release private taxpayer information, which is just like, I'm all for private taxpayer information, but if you want the people of the state of Michigan to invest in your business, then the people of the state of Michigan ought to have as much access to the information about that deal as any bank loan officer or hedge fund owner or Wall Street investor would have. I think that the presumption of privacy for organizations that are taking public funding is corrosive and something that this legislature should consider rolling back, even though I know the difficulty of trying to get any improvements to FOIA through this legislation. That's a separate issue.
Right. Very good. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Lindsay, and I appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you very much for that opportunity.
Seeing no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.
Smile.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just wanted to be in person, but yeah, me too.
Are you a Doctor Who fan?
No, not at all. It's my Mother's Day present.
Oh,